Okay. My name is Chris Rupschlager, and I lead our software development team. So everyone comes into an idea like this, like when we start talking about adding a gestural interface to something, everyone has expectations about how this is going to work. And so many of those expectations are based on what people saw in movies. Primarily Minority Report. Minority Report set a very high bar for how gestural interfaces could work, right? Because we have Tom Cruise doing this, and he's like swiping this way, and he brings this in, and he's like, can like play it. It doesn't work that way, unfortunately. It'd be amazing if it could, and it can be that magical, but not quite. So computers have become so good at recognizing humans. So through a camera or a depth camera, you can give a computer a video feed, and the computer can say, oh, there's a person, and here's the person's head and their arms. And it looks like this person is making a swiping motion or a waving motion. We can start to build interfaces that leverage that information in a way that lets someone just walk up and start interacting with stuff in a space. So one of the great advantages of making a touchless interface is you're not touching anything. So in this post-pandemic world, people might be a little bit more cautious about what they're putting their fingers on in space, as they probably should be. So another great advantage of a gestural interface, it doesn't have to be just a one-to-one interaction. We can facilitate one machine interacting with several people at the same time. It'd be really hard for multiple people to use the same keyboard, right? But I can train a camera on a space and facilitate interactions between 3 or 4 different people, all doing different things. So even though a gestural interface can be really exciting and really fun, there are things that we need to keep in mind. It's not going to be the best tool for everything. So one of the drawbacks, if we have a big crowd of people and they're all standing close together, they're like moving around, it can be difficult for the machine to lock on to the person that we actually want to interact with. Also, fine detail control can be a bit difficult. So if I want someone to point to something on a screen, this can be a difficult way to kind of facilitate a mouse-style interaction. Like pointing and clicking is a paradigm that doesn't work very well when we're talking about just a gestural interface. And then there's other considerations like Microsoft Kinects don't work really great outside because they rely on infrared light, and the sun puts out a heck of a lot of infrared light. So depending on the interaction that we want to facilitate, we need to keep the limitations of the technology in mind. So in the keyboard example, if I hit X on that keyboard, pretty reliably an X is going to appear on screen, right? Gestures are a little bit fuzzier than that. It's not hitting X. If we ask someone to wave, maybe they do this, maybe they do this, maybe they do this. It's open to their interpretation. So it's a little less absolute, but if we keep that in mind, we can still build great interfaces. So that's some of the pros and cons of this gestural interface technology idea. A lot of this learning came from real-world experience. We learned some of these lessons the hard way. So let's get into some case studies and look at some past projects where we build out some of these gestural interfaces. Iowa Children's Hospital, that was a very early project, and the idea was a kid could just come up and interact, and one of the activities there was flying an eagle through a landscape, and there's different targets they need to hit. So one important consideration on that project was a lot of kids would be in wheelchairs, and we needed to make absolute certain that a kid in a wheelchair could still participate. So our early testing, we were always testing in chairs. We were testing with smaller bodies, like kids in chairs, to make sure it worked well with them, that the tracking was performant enough that they were having a good experience too. So we don't always need super detailed information about people in a scene. We don't need every joint of their body all the time or their silhouette. Sometimes we just need to know where a person is in the space. So that was the case with Carillion. So with that project, we had a 1x6 matrix, and we need to know when someone approached the wall and stood there for a moment. If they are, great. Then we have the butterflies that are in the scene coalesce into a shape that appears right in front of them on the screen. The biggest challenge with the Carillion project was we had a lot of space to cover. So that 1x6 was about 20 feet wide, And we needed to know reliably in that 20 feet where someone was. So we needed 2 RealSense cameras. So there's a little bit of calibration, a little bit of work to make sure that both cameras were agreeing that yes, there's a person right here, and they're approximately 7 feet from the left side. So with the Naval Academy project, we did need really detailed skeleton tracking data because we were inviting users to essentially puppet a 3D figure that was in the game. So there was a rigged animation of a 3D person in the scene, and we were basically mapping Kinect data to that model. So if I raise my hand, the model raises its hand. Just like looking in a mirror, except the mirror is a live rendered 3D environment, including a character doing exactly what you're doing. I think the biggest challenge with the Navy project was we can map one-to-one Kinect data to a model, right? But Kinect data is noisy and weird sometimes. Sometimes it thinks your elbow is here, sometimes it thinks your elbow is up there, just for a frame or two. But it's enough that if I make a puppet do that weird elbow motion, it's gonna look weird, right? So a lot of that project was how do we smooth and correct the Kinect data so that the puppet that we're driving isn't doing crazy weird stuff. So one thing that all of these tracking systems do well is find hands. And hands are really important because it's our primary way to interact with all the stuff in the world. So for Cinemark, we created a large projected coloring book that you could just walk up. When your hands are recognized by the system, they become like coloring cursors on the wall. So as you move your hands around, you're filling the space with color. So it's almost like there's paint emanating from your hands onto the wall. One of the reasons this activation works so well is we don't need super detailed information from the sensors to make that happen and feel really good. Your brain gets that this motion is being reflected up there, but we're not relying on that hitting X on a keyboard level of detail. Cleveland Clinic was already working with an artist who had done the creative direction for the entire hospital. So there was already some existing work and some great thinking around an activation we could add to that space that incorporated that artist's vision and their past work into this space. So the idea that we came up with was, what if we just create a wall of fluid paint that people could stir around? It's limited in speed too, so fast motions aren't going to create crazy disturbances. It's meant to be very calming, very fluid, very chill. A really important part of this activation was it didn't require long stretches of their attention. A kid could jump in, play with it for a moment, and then step away when we need them to pay attention to something else. So there were game-like mechanics happening there, and there was interaction happening, but it wasn't something that was going to lock their attention in for any length of time. So today, this technology is amazing. The exciting thing to me is that it's only getting better. And the things that we can get from these sensors, the information and the speed that they work is just getting better and better every day. We have created a lot of projects that employ this gestural interface idea. We've experienced a lot of different problems that we had to work through, and that means we've learned a ton. So if this whole idea of gestural interfaces sounds interesting to you, if it sounds like a world that you want to dive into, then we need to talk.